The wind did not merely blow through Wind River, it screamed. It was a living thing, ancient and malevolent, tearing through the canyons of Wyoming with a voice that sounded like 1,000 grieving women. It rattled the loose shingles of the cabin roof and hissed through the gaps in the timber logs, bringing with it the bitter, metallic taste of snow that had not yet fallen, but was waiting, heavy in the gray belly of the sky. Alara Vance sat before the cracked vanity mirror. The glass was old, de-silvering at the edges, turning her reflection into something fragmented, incomplete. She was 32 years old, but the winter of 1889 had aged her. Her skin, the color of wet sandstone, a legacy of her Arapaho mother, looked pale in the dying light of the oil lamp. Her eyes, usually dark and sharp as obsidian, were rimmed with the red exhaustion of insomnia. She raised the brush to her hair. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The rhythm was hypnotic. It was the only sound in the house other than the wind. Caleb had been dead for 2 months. 61 days. Alara counted them not by the calendar, but by the fading scent of him on the pillow next to hers. Tobacco, pine resin, and that faint, underlying smell of wet earth that he always carried home from the mines. She looked into the mirror, past her own reflection, into the shadows of the room behind her. He was there. He was standing by the door, just at the edge of the lamplight. Caleb, but not the Caleb she had kissed goodbye that last morning. This was the Caleb the earth had returned. His skin was blue-gray, like river stones. Water dripped from his hair, landing on the wooden floorboards with a sound that was impossibly loud. Drip, drip, drip. Alara did not scream. She did not turn around. She knew that if she turned, he would be gone. This was the curse of her grief, or perhaps the curse of her blood, as the townspeople whispered, to see what was no longer there. Why have you come back? She whispered to the glass. The reflection of Caleb did not speak. His eyes were wide, terrified, staring not at her, but through her. His mouth opened, a black hole in his face, water spilling out instead of words. He raised a hand, pointing toward the floor, toward the earth beneath the house. Thump! The sound broke the trance. The image of Caleb dissolved into shadow. Alara blinked, her breath hitching in her chest. The room was empty. The water on the floor was gone. The only moisture was the sweat beading on her forehead. Thump! Thump! The sound came from the corner near the stove. Alara turned slowly, her hand instinctively going to the small knife she kept in her pocket. It was Toby. Her son sat on the floor, his small back to her. He was 8 years old, but his shoulders were hunched like an old man's. In his hand, he held a piece of charcoal taken from the cold fireplace. He was drawing on the rough-hewn logs of the wall. Toby, Alara called softly. The boy did not answer. He never answered. Not since they brought his father's body home in a wagon covered by a tarp. The doctor said it was shock, that his voice was locked away inside a room he couldn't find the key to. Alara feared it was something worse. She feared he had seen something the soul refused to articulate. She walked over to him, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She knelt beside him. What are you drawing, little bear? Toby didn't look up. His hand moved with frantic, jerky motions. The charcoal snapped, crumbling his grip, but he kept pressing. Circles. He was drawing circles. Dozens of them. Black, thick loops overlapping each other. They weren't just circles, they were holes. Dark, endless pits spiraling inward. He had covered 3 logs with them. They looked like staring eyes. They looked like the mouths of tunnels. Toby, stop, Alara said, grabbing his wrist gently. Stop. The boy froze. He dropped the charcoal. He turned to look at her, and for a second, Alara saw the same terror in his eyes that she had seen in the ghost of her husband. He opened his mouth, his throat working, his small chest heaving as he tried to push a sound out. But nothing came, only a dry, raspy breath. He pulled his hand away and wrapped his arms around himself, rocking back and forth. Alara pulled him in her chest, burying her face in his hair. He smelled of wood smoke and unwashed wool. It's all right, she lied, rocking him. It's just the wind. It's just the wind. But outside, the wind howled a denial. It wasn't just the wind. The valley was holding its breath. The snow was coming. And with the snow, something else was approaching. something that had been waiting for the ground to freeze. 2 days later, the riders came. They appeared on the ridge line just after noon, black silhouettes against a sky the color of bruised iron. There were 3 of them. They rode big, grain-fed horses, the kind that cost more than Alara's entire homestead. Alara was in the yard, chopping wood. The axe felt heavy in her hands, her muscles aching from the cold. When she saw them, she didn't run inside. She drove the axe head into the chopping block with a dull thud and wiped her hands on her apron. She reached for the Winchester rifle leaning against the porch railing. She didn't raise it, but she held it across her body, a barrier, a warning. The riders descended the slope, their horses kicking up dust and dead grass. They stopped 10 yards from the porch. The leader was a man Alara knew by sight, though they had never spoken. Elias Thorne, the nephew of Silas Thorne. He was young, with a face that was too soft for Wyoming, pampered by his uncle's money. He wore a heavy buffalo hide coat and a hat with a silver band. He smiled, but his eyes were flat, assessing the property, the barn, and finally, Alara herself. "Mrs. Vance," Elias said, touching the brim of his hat. "Cold day for chopping wood." "State your business, Elias," Alara said. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the tremors she felt in her hands. Elias chuckled, glancing at the 2 men flanking him. They were rough for sorts, hired guns with scars they wore like medals. "My uncle sends his regards," Elias said, "and his condolences. Caleb was a hardworking man. A tragedy, truly." "Your uncle didn't care about Caleb when he was alive," Alara said. "I doubt he cares now that he's dead." Elias's smile tightened at the edges. "You misjudge him. My uncle is a man of God, Mrs. Vance. He believes in charity. He believes in helping the wayward flock." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "He knows you are struggling. A widow, alone, with a afflicted child. It is too much burden for one woman, especially one of your heritage." Alara's grip on the rifle tightened. "Say what you came to say." "Progress is coming, Mrs. Vance. The railroad, the Union Pacific, is looking for a spur line through this valley. My uncle, in his foresight, is consolidating the land to make way for the future. He is offering to buy your deed." "This land isn't for sale," Alara said. "He is offering $3 an acre," Elias continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "That is generous. More than generous for a patch of dirt that yields nothing but rocks and grief." "Caleb is buried on that ridge," Alara said, nodding toward the hill behind the house. "I'm not selling his grave." Elias sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. He put the paper back in his coat. "Sentimentalism is a luxury of the wealthy, Mrs. Vance. You are not wealthy. You are destitute, and winter is here." He leaned forward over the pommel of his saddle. His voice dropped, losing its polite veneer. "My uncle feels a responsibility to cleanse this valley, to prepare it for the Lord's work. He worries that your presence here, it invites darkness. People talk, Alara. They say you brew potions. They say you speak to spirits. They say Caleb's death was a judgment." "Get off my land," Alara said. She shifted her stance, thumbing the hammer of the Winchester. Click! The sound was small in the vast silence of the valley, but it was loud enough. The horses shifted nervously. Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned his horse. "We will pray for you, Mrs. Vance," he said. "We will pray that you make the right decision before the snow seals you in." He signaled his men, and they rode away. They didn't look back. Alara watched them until they disappeared over the ridge. She didn't lower the rifle. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew this wasn't the end. Silas Thorne didn't ask, he demanded. And when demands were met with silence, he answered with wrath. She turned to go inside, needing the warmth of the stove. That was when she saw it, hanging from the beam of the porch roof, swaying gently in the wind. It was a doll, crude, made of straw and twine. But it wasn't a child's toy. It hung by a noose tied around its neck, and pinned to its chest was a piece of paper. Alara stepped closer, her breath freezing in the air. It was one of Toby's drawings, a drawing of a black circle. But someone had taken a red crayon, or was it blood, and drawn a cross through it. She ripped the doll down, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. She threw it into the snow and stomped on it, crushing the straw, burying the threat. Inside the house, Toby was watching from the window. His face was pressed against the glass, pale and ghostly. He had seen it all. The town of Bitter Creek was a scar on the landscape. 2 rows of wooden buildings huddled together against the wind, connected by a muddy thoroughfare that froze into ruts of iron-hard earth at night. Alara rode her mare into town the next morning. She left Toby locked in the house with the curtains drawn and the rifle hidden under the bed, telling him not to open the door for anyone but her specific knock. The guilt of leaving him ate at her, but she had no choice. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed a gun that she didn't have to reload after every shot. She felt the eyes on her as soon as she passed the livery stable. The blacksmith stopped his hammering. Women walking on the boardwalk pulled their shawls tighter and crossed the street to avoid her. "Witch," someone whispered. It was a hiss, carried by the wind. "Half-breed," another voice muttered. Alara kept her head high, staring straight ahead. She was used to this. Her mother had been a Arapaho, her father a trapper who drank himself to death. She belonged to neither world. To the whites, she was a savage. To the tribe, she was tainted. And now, as a widow living on prime land, she was an obstacle. She tied her horse in front of the general store. She needed flour, coffee, and bullets. Mr. Henderson, the shopkeeper, was weighing nails when she entered. He was a small, nervous man who had always been kind to Caleb. But when he saw Alara, his face closed up like a fist. "I can't serve you today, Mrs. Vance," he said, not meeting her eyes. Alara paused, her hand on the counter. "I have money, Mr. Henderson." Caleb's death benefit came through. "It ain't about money," Henderson mumbled, wiping the counter with a rag. "Mr. Thorne, he owns the mortgage on this building now. He sent word. Said anyone doing business with the obstructionists is obstructing God's work." Alara felt a cold fire ignite in her stomach. "You're letting him starve a widow and child? Is that God's work?" Henderson looked up then, his eyes pleading. "I have 5 kids, Alara. I can't fight him. Please, just go." Alara looked at the sacks of flour, the jars of rock candy Toby used to love. She slammed a silver dollar onto the counter. The sound echoed in the quiet store. "Keep your flour," she said. "But know this, Henderson. When the devil comes to collect from Thorne, he's going to take you too, just for holding his coat." She turned and stormed out. The street was colder now. The wind picked up, whipping her hair across her face. She had no food. She had no allies. She walked toward the sheriff's office, though she knew it was futile. Sheriff Miller was a good man once, but he was old, and he liked his whiskey more than his duty. And whiskey cost money, which Thorne had in abundance. She stopped. Across the street, the swinging doors of the Black Vein Saloon opened. A man was thrown out. He didn't stumble. He flew. He landed hard in the frozen mud, skidding a few feet. A bag was thrown after him. "And stay out, Kincaid. You've drunk enough for 3 lifetimes," the bartender yelled. The man in the mud groaned. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the gray sky. He began to laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound like a crow choking. Alara watched him. He was older, perhaps 45. His coat was worn, the leather cracked and stained. His boots were scuffed. He had a beard that was more neglect than style, peppered with gray. He sat up, wiping blood from a split lip. He reached for his hat, placed it on his head with exaggerated dignity, and then looked across the street. His eyes locked with hers. They were blue, not the pale, watery blue of the sky, but the sharp, electric blue of a flame. And in that moment, the drunken haze seemed to vanish from them. He didn't look at her with disgust. He didn't look at her with lust. He looked at her with recognition. He stood up, swaying slightly, and brushed the mud from his coat. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the horses and a wagon that had to swerve to miss him. Alara stepped back, her hand moving to the knife in her coat pocket. The man stopped 3 feet from her. He smelled of cheap whiskey, old sweat, and gun oil. "You're Caleb's wife," he said. His voice was gravel, rough from smoke and disuse. "I am Alara Vance," she corrected. "Who are you?" "Jonas," he said. "Jonas Kincaid." He said the name as if it should mean something to her. It didn't. You're drunk, Mr. Kincaid. I am, he agreed. Painfully so. But I'm also the only man in this town who isn't afraid of the shadow standing behind you. Alara frowned. She glanced over her shoulder. There was no one there. Not a literal shadow, Mrs. Vance, Jonas said, a crooked grin revealing a chipped tooth. I mean Silas Thorne. Alara turned back to him, her interest piqued. What do you know about Thorne? I know he wants your land. I know he sent his nephew to threaten you. And I know that if you don't get help, you and that boy of yours will be dead before the first snow melts. Alara studied him. He was a Recco man. His hands trembled slightly, the tremors of an addict needing a fix. But the way he stood, his right hand hovered near his hip, near the heavy Colt peacemaker strapped there. It was a reflexive stance, a gunman's stance. And you're offering help? Alara asked skeptically. For a price. A place to sleep, Jonas said. A roof. Coffee. And maybe a bottle if you have one hidden away. I can't pay you. I didn't ask for money. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I knew Caleb. A long time ago. Before he was whatever he was to you. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Caleb never mentioned to Jonas. Caleb didn't mention a lot of things, I'd wager, Jonas said softly. The playfulness was gone from his face. Take me to your ranch, Alara. Thorne is coming. You need a wolf to fight a wolf. Alara looked at the town that had turned its back on her. She looked at the sheriff's closed door. She looked at this stranger, this broken man who claimed to know her dead husband. Her instinct screamed danger, but her desperation screamed louder. My horse is over there, she said. If you fall off, I leave you in the snow. Jonas tipped his hat. Deal. The ride back to the homestead was silent. The sky had finally given up its burden, and snow began to fall. Large, wet flakes that stuck to their coats. Jonas rode, an ugly roan gelding he had retrieved from the livery. He rode with a slump, his head bowed against the wind, but Alara noticed that his eyes never stopped moving. He scanned the ridges, the tree line, the shadows of the rocks. He wasn't just a drunk, he was a hunter, or perhaps the hunted. When they arrived at the cabin, the sun was setting, bleeding a bruised purple light across the snow. Alara dismounted and rushed to the door. She knocked 3 times, 2 fast, 1 slow. The lock clicked. The door opened a crack. Toby peered out, his eyes wide. When he saw Jonas behind her, he tried to slam the door. It's okay, Toby, Alara said, pushing the door open gently. He's a friend. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. They entered the warmth of the cabin. Jonas stomped the snow off his boots. He looked around the small main room. The rough table, the rocking chair, the drawings of black circles on the walls. He paused when he saw the drawings. He walked over to the wall, staring at the charcoal loops. The boy, Jonas said. He sees something? He doesn't speak, Alara said, taking his coat. Not since Caleb died. Jonas nodded slowly. He reached out and touched one of the circles. Sometimes words aren't enough. He turned and dropped his heavy saddlebag onto the floor near the hearth. I'll take the barn. Don't want to scare the kid. It's freezing in the barn, Alara said. You can sleep by the fire. But the gun stays in the holster. And if you touch my son, I will kill you while you sleep. Jonas looked at her. For a moment, a flicker of genuine sadness crossed his face. I believe you would, Mrs. Vance. He sat in the rocking chair, groaning as his joints settled. He pulled a silver flask from his pocket, unscrewed it, and took a long pull. Thorne won't come tonight, Jonas said, wiping his mouth. He'll let the snow do the work. Isolate you. Make you feel small. How do you know him? Alara asked, busy making coffee she couldn't afford to waste. Thorne is a man of vision, Jonas said vaguely. The problem with visionaries is they don't care who they step on to get to the summit. He closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing deepened. He was asleep or passed out. Alara watched him. The firelight danced on his face, highlighting deep lines of regret etched into his skin. He muttered something in his sleep, a name she couldn't catch. Toby was hiding under the table, clutching his favorite toy, a ragged bear missing one eye. He stared at Jonas with an intensity that unsettled Alara. Go to bed, Toby, she whispered. The boy shook his head. He pointed at Jonas, then made a slashing motion across his own throat. "No," Elara said, though she felt the same fear. "He's here to help." She ushered Toby into the back room and tucked him in. When she returned to the main room, Jonas was still asleep. The flask had fallen from his hand. Elara stood over him. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. She looked at his saddlebag. Trust was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. She knelt beside the bag. It was old leather, worn smooth. She undid the buckles carefully, eyes on Jonas. He didn't stir. She reached inside. A box of ammunition. A spare shirt, stained and torn. A half-empty bottle of laudanum. And a notebook. She pulled the notebook out. It was a black ledger, the kind used by shopkeepers. She opened it. There were no accounts inside. Only names. List after list of names. Dates. Locations. Most of the names were crossed out with thick, angry lines of ink. Jacob Miller, Leavenworth dead. Bill Halloway, Omaha dead. Samuel Pike, Cheyenne dead. It was a hit list. Or a reckoning. She turned the pages. Tucked into the back of the book was a photograph. It was an old tintype, the edges bent and cracking. It showed 3 men standing in front of a gaping hole in the earth, a mine entrance. They were younger, dirtier, smiling with the manic energy of men who had just struck it rich. On the left was a man with cold, pious eyes, holding a Bible in one hand and a pickaxe in the other. Silas Thorne. In the middle was Jonas Kincaid, looking sharp, dangerous, a badge pinned to his vest. A Pinkerton badge. And on the right, Elara's breath stopped. On the right, with his arm draped around Jonas's shoulder, laughing, was a man she knew better than her own face. But the caption written in ink beneath him didn't say Caleb Vance. It read, Caleb the Ghost Galloway. And beneath the photo, a date, 1879. The Seraphim Mine heist. Elara stared at the image. The 3 of them. Thorne, Jonas, Caleb. They weren't strangers. They were partners. Jonas hadn't come here to save her. He hadn't stumbled into town. He was the man crossing out the names. The floorboard creaked. Elara looked up. Jonas was awake. He was sitting up in the chair, the Colt Peacemaker in his hand. The barrel was not pointed at her, but it wasn't holstered either. His blue eyes were clear, cold, and utterly sober. "You shouldn't have opened that, Elara," he said softly. Outside, the wind screamed, sounding like a woman weeping for the dead. Elara didn't drop the book. She didn't raise her hands. She looked at the photo, then at the man who had lied his way into her home. "Who was my husband?" she asked, her voice trembling with a rage that burned hotter than fear. "And what did you 3 do?" Jonas cocked the hammer of the gun. Click. "We stole from God," Jonas whispered. "And now the devil is here to collect the interest." The click of the Colt Peacemaker echoed in the small cabin like a cracking bone. Elara didn't flinch. She stared into the barrel of the gun, then up into Jonas Kincaid's eyes. They were blue ice, unreadable, void of the warmth that had briefly flickered there earlier. The wind outside battered the walls, a relentless assault that made the timbers groan. "You came to kill me," Elara said. It wasn't a question. It was a resignation. "You crossed out the others. Now it's Caleb's family." Jonas held her gaze for a long, suffocating moment. Then, slowly, he lowered the hammer. Click. He placed the gun on the table, barrel pointing away from her, and pushed it toward the center. "If I wanted you dead, Mrs. Vance, you wouldn't have heard the hammer," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't cross out those names." Thorne did. Elara looked at the ledger, still open in her hands. The ink seemed to bleed on the page. "Explain," she demanded. "And if you lie, I will scream. My son is in the next room with a rifle. He might not speak, but he knows how to pull a trigger." It was a bluff. Toby was terrified of loud noises. But Jonas didn't know that. He sighed, rubbing his face with calloused hands. 10 years ago, the Seraphim Mine. It wasn't a mine. It was a grave for men who died digging for nothing. Thorne ran the operation. I was security, Pinkerton. Caleb was the demolition expert. Caleb was a farmer. Elara interrupted, her voice cracking. He didn't know anything about explosives. He knew enough to blow a safe on a Union Pacific payroll train. Jonas corrected gently. "That's what the photo was, Elara." Not a mining crew. A heist crew. He reached for the flask on the floor, found it empty, and grimaced. Thorne wasn't satisfied with the gold from the ground. He wanted the army payroll being stored at the depot. He planned it. I provided the security codes. Caleb provided the boom. We stole $50,000 in gold certificates and bullion. It was supposed to be a clean job. 50,000, Alara whispered. The number was abstract, impossible. They had struggled to buy seed for the planting season. Caleb had patched his boots with cardboard. Thorne got greedy, Jonas continued. He wanted to cut the loose ends. He rigged the escape tunnel to collapse on us. He meant to bury us with the gold and dig it up later. But Caleb, he was smarter. He saw the double cross coming. He took the gold, blew the secondary exit, and vanished. Left me and Thorne in the dark. Jonas looked at the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. Thorne dug himself out. I spent 3 days in the dark listening to rats. When I got out, I lost my badge. I lost my reputation. Thorne? He found religion. He decided the gold was his divine right, stolen by a Judas. He's been hunting us ever since. And Caleb? Alara asked. He never spent a dime of it. We lived on beans and cornmeal. Because he knew the gold was marked. Or maybe because he felt guilty. I don't know. Jonas looked at her. I spent 10 years in a bottle, trying to forget. Thorne spent 10 years building an empire to fund his search. And now, he's found the end of the trail. So you're here for the gold, Alara said, closing the book. I'm here because I owe a debt, Jonas said. Not to Caleb. He left me to rot. But to the man I used to be. Thorne killed the other 2 men on that list last month. I'm next. You're next. The only way I survive is if I stop him. And I can't stop him alone. Alara looked at the photo again, at the smiling man she had married. A stranger. A thief. A ghost. He never told me, she whispered. 5 years of marriage. He never told me. He wanted to protect you, Jonas said. Or he was ashamed. Men carry their past like stones, Alara. Sometimes they're too heavy to share. Alara stood up. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean by the revelation. Her husband wasn't a martyr. He was a fugitive. But he was still Toby's father. He was still the man who had built this house with his own hands. Sleep on the floor, she said coldly. If Thorne is coming, I need a gunman, not a friend. But don't think for a second I trust you, Mr. Kincaid. Jonas, he said. Mr. Kincaid, she repeated. She walked into the bedroom. Toby was awake, sitting up in bed, clutching the bear. He looked at her with huge, dark eyes. Alara climbed into bed beside him, pulling the quilt up to her chin. She didn't sleep. She listened to the wind, and for the first time, she wondered if the howling outside was the sound of Caleb's soul, finally released from the burden of his secrets, or if it was the sound of hell coming closer. Morning brought a white silence. The snow had stopped, leaving the valley buried under 2 feet of powder that glittered like diamond dust in the harsh, cold sun. Jonas was already up when Alara emerged. He had made coffee, black, thick, and bitter. He was cleaning his rifle by the window, stripping the mechanism with the practiced ease of a man who treated weapons better than people. Thorne won't send riders today, Jonas said without looking up. Snow's too deep for horses to move fast. But he'll send scouts. We need to prepare. Prepare how? Alara asked, pouring a cup of coffee. Her hands were steady today. The shock had hardened into a cold resolve. Can you shoot that Winchester? I can hit a coyote at 50 yards. Thorne's men shoot back. Coyotes don't. Jonas reassembled the rifle with a sharp clack. Get your coat. And the boy. Toby stays inside. Toby needs to learn that the monster at the door isn't a spirit. It's a man. And men bleed. They went out into the blinding brightness of the yard. The cold was a physical blow, freezing the breath in their lungs. Jonas set up empty tin cans on the fence posts. He didn't teach her how to aim. He taught her how to survive. Don't close one eye, he barked as Alara raised the rifle. You lose half your vision. Keep both open. Watch the periphery. Thorne's men flank. They don't come straight on. Alara fired. The kid spun off the post. Good, Jonas said. Now reload. Faster. Your hands are shaking. Stop it. It's freezing, Alara snapped, fumbling with the cartridges. Fear makes you cold. Anger makes you warm. Get angry, Alara. They killed your husband. They want to kill your son. Put that into the chamber. Alara shoved the bullet in. She thought of Elias Thorne's smirk. She thought of the doll hanging from the porch. She fired. The second can exploded. Toby watched from the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket. He wasn't looking at the targets. He was looking at the ridge line, his head cocked to the side, listening to something only he could hear. After an hour, Alara's shoulder was bruised and her fingers were numb, but her aim was true. Jonas nodded, the closest thing to a compliment she would get. You've got the eye, he said. Apache blood? Arapaho, she corrected. And my father was a trapper. He taught me to shoot before he taught me to read. Good skills for a wife of a bank robber, Jonas muttered. Alara turned on him, rifle in hand. Caleb was a good father. Whatever he did before, he loved this boy. I didn't say he didn't. Jonas looked at Toby. The boy had taken a stick and was drawing in the snow. Jonas walked over to him. Alara followed. Toby had drawn a figure, a man on his knees, and standing over him, a tall, stick-figure man holding something up, a cross. Jonas froze. His face went pale beneath the windburn. Alara, he said quietly. Where did they find Caleb's body? By the river, she said. 3 miles downstream. They said he slipped and hit his head. No, Jonas whispered. He pointed at the drawing in the snow. This isn't a slip. This is an execution. He looked at Toby. Boy, look at me. Toby didn't look up. He kept drawing. He drew a circle next to the kneeling man. A black, jagged hole. The last rites, Jonas muttered. Thorne's signature. He likes to save the soul before he destroys the body. He turned to Alara. Toby didn't just see the body, Alara. He saw the murder. He was there. Alara felt the world tilt. That's impossible. Caleb went out alone to check the herd. Toby was in bed. Are you sure? Alara thought back to that morning. The confusion. The panic. She had found Toby later, hiding in the barn, shivering. She had assumed it was grief. She knelt in the snow beside her son. Toby, did you follow Papa that day? Toby stopped drawing. He looked at Alara, tears welling in his eyes. He nodded slowly. What did you see, little bear? Toby's hand moved to the snow again. He drew the kneeling man. Then he drew the standing man hitting him. Then he drew the standing man pushing the kneeling man into the circle. Not the river. The circle. The river was a lie, Jonas said, his voice hard. They moved the body later. They killed him somewhere else. Somewhere with a hole. A mine shaft? Alara asked. There are no mines on this land. That's why Thorne wants to buy it. To build the railroad. Jonas stood up, scanning the horizon. Thorne doesn't want a railroad. He wants the gold. And he thinks Caleb hid it here. If Caleb was killed near a hole, maybe he wasn't hiding the gold. Maybe he found where Thorne was digging. Digging. Thorne isn't waiting for the deed, Alara. He's been tunneling under your land for months. He's looking for the vault. They rode out to the north pasture, near the old dry creek bed. The snow was deep, the horses struggling, but Jonas was relentless. The water, he had said. You told me the neighbors said your water was bad. Cursed. It tastes metallic, Alara said. I stopped using the well weeks ago. We melt snow. They reached the old well at the edge of the property line. It was a stone structure, abandoned years ago when Caleb dug the new one closer to the house. Jonas brushed the snow off the wooden cover and pried it open. A foul, chemical smell wafted up. It wasn't the smell of rot. It was the smell of industry. He dropped the bucket down, pulled it up. The water was gray, sludgy. Jonas dipped his finger in, sniffed it, and wiped it on his coat. Mercury, he said, used to separate gold from ore. You don't use mercury for farming, Alara. He looked toward the hills that bordered Thorne's property. He's tunneling. Deep. The runoff is leaching into your groundwater. That's why he tried to buy you out cheap first. If the government finds out he's poisoning the watershed with illegal mining, he loses his federal contracts. So he killed Caleb because Caleb found the tunnel, Jonas finished. Caleb didn't hide the gold on your land, Alara. He buried it deep. Thorne is trying to find it from underneath. Caleb must have felt the vibrations or seen the runoff. He went to investigate, and he found Thorne. Alara stared at the gray water. It was poison. Her husband had been murdered not for a past sin, but because he tried to stop a present crime. The gold, Alara said, her voice shaking. Where is it, Jonas? If we give it to him, Will he stop? Jonas looked at her, pity in his eyes. Men like Thorn don't stop because they get paid. They stop when they're dead. Even if you gave him the gold, you're a witness. Toby is a witness. He can't leave you alive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stick of dynamite. A single, red stick. Caleb was the demolition expert, Jonas said. He stole the gold, but he also stole 3 crates of this. Where'd he keep his tools? The root cellar, Ilara said. Behind the potatoes. We need to go back, Jonas said grimly. We're going to turn your house into a fortress. Because tonight, Thorn isn't sending a lawyer. He's coming himself. Night fell like a hammer. The moon was hidden behind fresh clouds, plunging the valley into a suffocating darkness. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tight as a bowstring. They had barricaded the windows with heavy oak planks Caleb had cut for the barn repairs. The table was overturned against the door. Ilara sat on the floor with Toby, the Winchester across her lap. Jonas paced, checking the sight lines through the gaps in the planks. They'll come from the tree line, Jonas muttered. Wind is blowing south. They'll use it to mask their sound. How many? Ilara asked. Thorn has a private security force. Maybe 20 men. But in this snow, he can't bring them all. 10, maybe 12. 2 against 12, Ilara said. 3, Jonas said, nodding at Toby. The boy was holding a small knife Ilara had given him. His knuckles were white. The boy has eyes. He sees things we miss. Suddenly, Toby stiffened. He dropped the knife and covered his ears. Thump! A heavy, dull sound against the roof. Get down! Jonas roared, diving for Ilara. Boom! The roof exploded. Wood and snow rained down into the cabin. A lantern shattered, spilling oil across the floor. Flames licked up the wall instantly. They're not shooting, Jonas yelled, coughing in the smoke. They're burning us out. Dynamite! He grabbed a blanket and smothered the fire before it could spread. Another explosion rocked the ground outside, near the porch. Through the gap in the window barricade, a voice floated in. Amplified, deep, terrifying. Behold, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape. And though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. Thorn, Jonas hissed, quoting Jeremiah. Pompous bastard. Gunfire erupted. Bullets shredded the wood of the cabin, punching holes through the chinking. Glass shattered. Ilara shoved Toby under the bed. Stay there. Do not come out. She crawled to the window, raised the Winchester, and fired blindly into the dark. She saw a muzzle flash and aimed for it. A scream pierced the night. I got one, she yelled, a savage triumph in her voice. Don't celebrate, reload. Jonas was at the other window, firing his Colt with rhythmic precision. Bang, bang, bang. Ilara. The back door. Ilara spun around just as the back door splintered inward. A man in a heavy coat kicked it open, a shotgun leveled. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the trigger. The Winchester kicked against her shoulder. The man flew backward out into the snow, his chest a ruin. She stared at the open door, the wind rushing in, fanning the smoke. She had killed a man. Close it, Jonas screamed. She scrambled to the door, slamming it shut and throwing the bolt. Her hands were slick with sweat and oil. They're flanking, Jonas yelled. They know we're alone. Suddenly, the shooting stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. It was heavy, pregnant with threat. Jonas, Ilara whispered. Chill. Jonas Kincaid. Thorn's voice boomed again, closer this time. There is no redemption for you, Judas. Send out the woman and the boy. I will make it quick. You can burn with the house. Jonas looked at Ilara. His face was streaked with soot and blood from a cut on his forehead. He looked tired, infinitely tired. He won't let you live, Jonas whispered. You know that. I know, Ilara said. We fight until the end. Jonas looked at the door, then back at her. A strange expression crossed his face. A calculation. There's another way, he said softly. What? The gold. I know where it is. Ilara frowned. You said he didn't. I lied. I figured it out when I saw Toby's drawing. The circle. It's the old well. The one with the mercury. That's the secondary shaft Caleb blew. The gold is down there. So, tell him. Make a deal. Jonas shook his head. Thorn doesn't make deals with thieves. Unless... He moved toward her. Fast. Before Alara could react, Jonas grabbed her wrist. He twisted her arm behind her back, painful and sharp. He jammed the barrel of his cold pistol against her temple. "Jonas!" she screamed, struggling. "What are you doing?" "Surviving," he hissed in her ear. "I'm sorry, Alara." He kicked the front door open. "Thorn!" Jonas shouted into the darkness. "Thorn, hold your fire." He dragged Alara out onto the porch, into the freezing wind and the glare of the torches that Thorn's men were holding. Alara blinked, blinded by the light. She saw them, a dozen men forming a semicircle. And in the center, sitting on a black horse like a dark king, was Silas Thorn. He held a Bible in one hand and a torch in the other. "I have the woman," Jonas yelled, "and I know where the gold is. I trade them for my life. A horse and safe passage." Alara stopped struggling. The cold of the gun against her head was nothing compared to the ice that filled her heart. He had betrayed her. After all the talk of debt, of redemption, he was just a thief, a rat who had survived the dark once and would do anything to survive it again. "Jonas, please," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Toby, shut up," Jonas growled, jamming the gun harder against her skull. Thorn rode closer. The torchlight illuminated his face, gaunt, bearded, eyes burning with a fanatic's light. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. "The prodigal returns," Thorn said smoothly. "You offer me the widow." "She's yours," Jonas said, "and the boy inside. Just let me ride." Thorn considered this. He looked at Alara, trembling in Jonas's grip. He looked at the burning roof of the cabin where a mute child hid under a bed. "Bring her to me," Thorn commanded. "Kneel, Jonas. Kneel and offer your sacrifice." Jonas pushed Alara forward, forcing her down into the snow at Thorn's horse's hooves. She felt her knees, the cold seeping through her dress. She looked up at Thorn, then back at Jonas. Jonas stood over her, gun still drawn. But he wasn't looking at Thorn. He was looking at her. And for a split second, Alara saw something in his blue eyes. Not betrayal, desperation, and a signal. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod toward the horse's flank. But before she could understand, Thorn raised his torch. "Accept this offering, Lord," Thorn bellowed, "and cleanse this valley of its sin." He threw the torch, not at the house, at Alara. The torch spiraled through the air, a comet of fire against the black sky. Alara didn't scream. Time seemed to stretch, turning sluggish and thick like molasses. She saw the torch hit the snow inches from her knee, hissing as the fire fought the ice. She saw the manic triumph in Silas Thorn's eyes. And she saw Jonas move. He didn't run. He didn't cower. The moment Thorn threw the torch, distracted, his arm extended, his chest exposed, Jonas spun. The surrender vanished. The slumped shoulders of a defeated drunk snapped into the rigid, lethal posture of a Pinkerton agent. The Colt peacemaker rose. Bang, bang. 2 shots, deafening in the frozen air. Thorn's horse reared, screaming, its eyes rolling white. Thorn was thrown backward, landing hard in the snow. "Run, Alara!" Jonas roared, tackling the nearest gunman before the man could raise his rifle. It was a feint. The betrayal had been a lie. A desperate gamble to get close enough to strike the head of the snake. Alara scrambled to her feet, her dress heavy with wet snow. Chaos erupted. Thorn's men, momentarily stunned by the sudden violence, opened fire. Bullets chewed up the porch railing, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. "Get inside," Jonas shouted, pistol whipping a man to the ground. He spun and fired at another shadow in the tree line. Alara didn't run inside. She grabbed the torch from the snow. It was still burning, fueled by pitch and hate. She swung it wildly at a man, rushing her with a knife. The fire caught his coat. He screamed, falling back into the darkness. "Kill them." Thorn's voice cut through the noise. He was alive. He stood up from the snow bank, clutching his shoulder. Jonas's bullet had hit him, but the heavy buffalo coat, and perhaps something harder beneath it, had saved his life. He was wounded but not dead, and he was furious. "Burn it all," Thorn commanded. Jonas tried to aim again, but a rifle slammed into the back of his head. He crumpled. 3 men were on him instantly, kicking, beating, driving him into the frozen mud. "Jonas!" Alara screamed. A hand grabbed her hair, jerking her head back. She saw the cold, impassive face of Elias, the nephew. He pressed the cold steel of a knife against her throat. "Be still," which Elias whispered, "or I open you up right here." The fighting stopped as quickly as it had begun. The silence returned, heavier now, punctuated only by the crackle of the burning cabin roof and Jonas's ragged breathing. Thorn walked forward. He limped slightly. Blood stained the snow where he stepped. He stopped in front of Jonas, who was on his knees, blood pouring from a gash in his scalp. Thorn looked down at his old partner. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked disappointed. "You always were a fool, Jonas," Thorn said softly. "You thought you could kill the Lord's anointed?" Jonas spat a mouthful of blood onto Thorn's pristine boot. "I don't see the Lord here, Silas. I just see a thief in a fancy coat." Thorn sighed. He signaled his men. "Bring the boy." 2 men dragged Toby out of the house. He wasn't crying. He was clutching his bear, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the carnage with a terrifying calmness. "No." Alara struggled against Elias's grip. "Leave him alone. He knows nothing." "He knows everything," Thorn said. "He drew the map, didn't he?" They were herded into the barn, the only structure not yet burning. The smell of hay and old manure mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Thorn sat on a grain barrel, his men standing guard with lanterns that cast long, dancing shadows. Jonas was tied to a post, barely conscious. Alara and Toby were huddled in the corner. Thorn cleaned his glasses with a silk handkerchief. He looked like a schoolteacher about to give a lesson, not a man who had just ordered a massacre. "The gold, Mrs. Vance," Thorn said. "Where's the entrance to the lower shaft?" Caleb blew the main lift. "But there is a service tunnel." "Where is it?" "I don't know," Alara spat. "Caleb never told me." "He told the boy," Thorn said, looking at Toby. "Children see what we hide." He stood up and walked toward Alara. He stopped a foot away, looming over her. The lantern light caught his eyes, gray, cold, and eerily familiar. "You have his defiance," Thorn murmured, studying her face. "But you have her eyes. Your mother's eyes." Alara froze. "You didn't know my mother. She died on the reservation 20 years ago." Thorn smiled. It was a thin, cruel twisting of lips. "Nadezhda, that was her name. Hope, in Russian, though she was Arapaho. She worked at the trading post near Fort Laramie." 1856. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "How do you know her name?" Thorn leaned closer. He smelled of gunpowder and expensive cologne. "I knew her very well, Alara, before she was sent away, before she swelled with the consequences of our association." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alara stared at him. The gray eyes, the high cheekbones, the cold intelligence. "No," she whispered. "I was a young man then," Thorn said, his voice taking on a preaching cadence. "Weak, tempted by the flesh of the savage. I sinned, and when I realized my error, I did what was necessary. I sent her away. I cleansed my life." He reached out and touched Alara's cheek with a gloved finger. She recoiled as if burned. "But sin has a way of lingering," Thorn whispered. "Caleb knew. That's why he laughed at me. That day at the mine, when we found the gold, he looked at me and said, 'I know about the girl, Silas. I know about your bastard in Wind River.'" Thorn's face hardened. The mask of piety slipped, revealing the monster beneath. "He didn't steal the gold for money, Alara. He stole it to blackmail me, to keep me from becoming governor. He threatened to expose my indiscretion." Alara felt bile rise in her throat. She looked at Jonas. He was awake, staring at Thorn with horror. Even he hadn't known this. "You're my father," Alara said. The words tasted like poison. "I am your creator," Thorn corrected. "But you're not my daughter. You are my mistake. A stain on my soul that I've spent 30 years trying to scrub out." He straightened up, adjusting his coat. "Caleb thought he could protect you. He thought moving here, marrying you, would keep you safe. But God works in mysterious ways. He brought the railroad. He brought the need for this land. He brought me back to finish what I started." He pulled a heavy revolver from his holster. "I'm not just clearing land for a train, Alara. I am pruning the family tree. I am removing the rot." He pointed the gun at Toby. Now, the gold, or the abomination dies first. The silence in the barn was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Alara looked at her son. Her father was going to kill her son. The cycle of violence, begun in a trading post 30 years ago, was closing its circle here in the blood-soaked straw. "Toby," Alara whispered. "Give it to him." Toby didn't move. He stared at Thorn. The gun didn't scare him anymore. He had seen worse. He had seen his father murdered by this same man. Slowly, deliberately, Toby reached into his coat. The guards tensed, fingers on triggers. Toby pulled out the bear, the ragged, one-eyed toy. He held it out to Thorn. Thorn laughed. A dry, barking sound. "A toy? You offer me a toy?" Toby ripped the bear's head off. Inside the stuffing, there was a folded piece of parchment. It was yellowed, brittle. Toby pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a map, a diagram of the mine tunnels beneath the property. Thorn snatched it from the boy's hand. His eyes scanned the lines greedily. "The ventilation shaft," Thorn muttered, tracing a line. "Here, it connects to the old well. I was right." He looked at Jonas, then at Alara. Triumph washed over his face, erasing the pain of his wound. "The well," Thorn announced to his men. "The gold is staged at the bottom of the dry well. Caleb was moving it when I caught him. He didn't get it out." He turned to Elias. "Watch them. If they move, shoot the woman. Leave the boy for me." Thorn turned to leave, clutching the map like a holy relic. And then Toby spoke. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry. It was a voice rusty from disuse, small and cracking, but clear as a bell in the quiet barn. "Tick," Toby said. Thorn stopped. He turned back. "What?" Toby looked straight at Thorn, his small dark eyes burning with a hate far too old for his face. "Tick," Toby repeated. "Tick. Boom." Jonas's head snapped up. He looked at the map in Thorn's hand, then at Toby, then at Alara. His eyes widened. "Alara," Jonas whispered. "The mercury." Alara looked at him, confused. "The water wasn't poisoned by runoff," Jonas hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Mercury is used to make fulminate. Pretty miss." Caleb didn't hide the gold in the well. Realization hit Alara like a physical blow. Caleb wasn't a miner. He was a demolition expert. He hadn't spent the last 5 years farming. He had spent 5 years turning this homestead into a fail-safe. He rigged it, Alara breathed. Thorn was already at the barn door. He didn't hear them. He was blinded by the gold. "Elias," Thorn yelled, "bring the winch. We go down tonight." The barn door slammed shut, leaving Elias and 2 guards inside with the prisoners. Jonas tested his ropes. He was weak, losing blood, but his eyes were sharp. "Hey," Jonas called out to Elias. "Boy." Elias turned, sneering. "Don't talk to me, dead man." "Your uncle," Jonas wheezed. "He's going to the well. He's going to claim his fortune, and then we're going to bury you in it." "There is no fortune," Jonas said, a grim smile spreading across his bloody face. Caleb Galloway didn't steal gold to get rich. He stole it to buy black powder. 300 pounds of it. Elias frowned. "You're lying. Why do you think the well was dry?" Jonas laughed softly. "It's not a well. It's a cannon barrel. And your uncle just walked into the fuse." Outside, shouts echoed. The creak of a winch. The heavy thud of boots on frozen ground. Thorn was descending. Alara looked at Toby. The boy was making a motion with his hand, a twisting motion, like turning a key. "The root cellar," Alara whispered. "Caleb's workspace. The place she was never allowed to clean." There was a strange, heavy iron switch on the wall behind the potato bin. Caleb had told her it was for the water pump, but they didn't have a pump. She needed to get to the house. Jonas saw her realization. He looked at the guards. 3 men, heavily armed. "Alara," Jonas said softly. "When I move, you run." "You can't," she said. "You're tied." "I've been out of these ropes for 5 minutes," Jonas said. "Being careful night. Hard to tie, easy to slip." He looked at her with those electric blue eyes. The cynicism was gone. The exhaustion was gone. There was only peace. "Go burn it down, Alara. Finish it." Jonas didn't wait for an answer. He roared, a primal, animal sound, and burst free from the post. He didn't go for a gun. He threw himself bodily at Elias, tackling him into the lantern. Glass shattered. Fire erupted in the straw. "Run!" Jonas screamed, taking a knife to the gut as he slammed Elias's head into the floor. Alara grabbed Toby's hand. She didn't look back. She ran. She burst out of the barn into the snow. The yard was chaos. Thorne's men were clustered around the well, 50 yards away. They were shouting down into the hole. Alara turned toward the house. It was burning, flames licking the roof, but the structure still stood. "Stop her!" someone yelled. A bullet whizzed past her ear. She shoved Toby toward the darkness of the tree line. "Run, Toby! Run and don't stop! Mama! Go!" She pushed him away and turned back to the burning house. She ran through the front door into the inferno. The heat was unbearable. The smoke was a solid wall. She dropped to her hands and knees, crawling across the floorboards she had scrubbed 1,000 times. Cough! Crawl! Cough! She reached the kitchen. The rug over the trapdoor was burning. She kicked it aside, ignoring the smell of singed fabric and hair. She pulled the trapdoor open. The root cellar was cool. Damp. She dropped down, landing on the dirt floor. She scrambled to the back wall, behind the potato bin. There it was. The iron switch. A heavy, industrial blasting box lever, rusted and waiting. Above her, the house groaned. The fire was eating the beams. Outside, in the well, Silas Thorne was descending into the dark, thinking he was descending into heaven. He was descending into the chamber of a gun loaded 5 years ago by a man who knew exactly how this story would end. Alara grabbed the handle. She thought of the trading post. She thought of her mother, abandoned and shamed. She thought of Caleb, murdered in the snow. She thought of Jonas, bleeding in the barn by her this second. "Daddy," she whispered into the darkness. "Welcome home." She threw the switch. The sound was not an explosion. It was a geological event. The earth didn't just break, it liquefied. A column of fire, white-hot and pure, erupted from the well shaft, shooting 300 feet into the air. It turned the night into blinding noon. The shockwave hit the house a fraction of a second later. The floor of the root cellar heaved, throwing Alara against the wall. Dust rained down. The world became a ringing void. Then silence. Long, ringing silence. Alara lay in the dark, coughing. She checked her limbs. Bruised, battered, but whole. The root cellar, reinforced with heavy timbers by Caleb, had held. She climbed the ladder. The trapdoor was gone. The roof of the house was gone. She climbed out into the night. Or what was left of it. The snow in the yard had vanished, vaporized by the heat. In its place was a crater. A massive, smoking maw in the earth where the well and Silas Thorne had been. The barn was gone, flattened by the blast wave. The fire was out, snuffed by the displacement of air. Alara stumbled through the debris. The silence was absolute. Thorne's men, those who hadn't been vaporized, had fled or were buried under the avalanche of snow triggered from the ridge. "Jonas," she croaked. She walked toward where the barn had been. She found him. He was lying on his back, half buried under a collapsed beam. Elias was next to him, his neck broken, dead. Jonas was alive. Barely. His chest was a ruin. His breath came in wet, bubbling gasps. Alara fell to her knees beside him. She tried to lift the beam, but it was too heavy. "Jonas," she wept. "Jonas, hang on." Jonas opened his eyes. The blue was fading, turning gray like the winter sky. He looked at her, and then at the smoking crater. He smiled. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Did we get him?" he whispered. "We got him," Alara said, taking his hand. "It was cold. He's gone. It's all gone." "Good," Jonas wheezed. Caleb was a genius. Crazy, but a genius. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Alara, I'm here." "The book," he whispered. "My ledger. I have it. It's safe." "Burn it," Jonas said. His voice was fading. Don't let Toby see the names." "Cross me out, Alara. Cross me out. You're not a name in a book, Jonas. You're a hero." "No," he sighed, his eyes drifting to the stars appearing through the smoke. "Just a ghost, looking for a place to rest." He exhaled, a long, rattling breath that carried the last of his pain away into the Wyoming night. His hand went slack. Alara sat there for a long time. She didn't cry. She was beyond tears. She was hollowed out, filled only with the cold wind and the smell of sulfur. A sound made her turn. Toby. He emerged from the tree line, small and shivering. He walked over the blackened earth, stepping over debris, until he stood beside her. He looked at Jonas. He reached out and touched the dead man's cheek. Then he looked at Alara. He opened his mouth. "Mama," he said. "Clear. Strong." Alara pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his neck. They held each other in the ruins of their life, two survivors on an island of ash. Epilogue. 3 days later. The wagon was packed. It wasn't much: clothes, food, a few blankets. Alara stood by the fresh grave on the ridge. She had buried Jonas next to Caleb. 2 thieves. 2 partners. 2 men who had loved her and her son in their own broken ways. She placed the ledger on the grave. She struck a match and held it to the pages. She watched the names burn. Thorne, Pike, Galloway, Kincaid. The ink curled and vanished, taking the sins of the past with it. She turned to the house. It was a shell, ruined beyond repair. She took the kerosene can and walked the perimeter, pouring the last of the fuel onto the blackened timbers. "What are you doing?" Toby asked from the wagon seat. His voice was still raspy, but he used it now. He used it to name things, to reclaim the world. "Cleaning," Alara said. She threw the match. The fire caught instantly, roaring to life. It consumed the bloodstains on the floor. It consumed the circles drawn on the walls. It consumed the memory of the ghost in the mirror. Alara climbed onto the wagon seat. She took the reins. "Where are we going?" Toby asked. Alara looked west, toward the mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, toward a place where no one knew the name Thorne, or Vance, or Kincaid. "Somewhere warm," Alara said. "Somewhere the wind doesn't scream." She snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching on the snow. They didn't look back. Behind them, the smoke rose into the gray sky, a final prayer from the ghosts of Wind River, fading, until there was nothing left but the white, silent snow.